Clara Whitfield had grown used to silence, the kind that settles over a tired, lonely homestead when the last hope has ridden away. Her parents had once filled their small edge-of-town ranch with laughter, plans, and stories about a bright future. But the fever had stolen them both in a single winter. At 17, Clara buried them with her own hands and learned that life in the West never paused for grief. Now at 20, she worked harder than any cowboy but earned half the respect. Townsfolk would nod at her politely but whisper behind her back, "Poor girl, living alone like a stray dog." Men came around not to offer marriage, but to see if she'd give in to loneliness and desperation. Clara never did. Pride was the one possession she still owned. Her only real companion was a stubborn, gray mare named Pearl and the blistering sun that beat across the plains. Every day was the same: mend fences, chase off coyotes, patch up the roof again before a storm tore through. But the ranch needed more than patches. It needed money. And Clara had none left out. As she sat at the small wooden table one dusty afternoon, she faced a stack of unpaid land notices. 3 months overdue. One more and the bank would come take everything: her home, her memories, her last piece of her family's legacy. Her fingers trembled against the paper. She pressed them flat, forcing herself to breathe steady. A knock came at the door. Clara jumped, quickly wiping the worry from her face as she opened it. The town's mail rider, a cheerful young man with freckles, handed her an envelope sealed with thick red wax. "No sender name," he said, curious. "Looks official, though." Clara thanked him and shut the door, staring at the unfamiliar seal. Her heart beat faster as she broke it open. Inside was a single letter written in strong, angular handwriting. "To Miss Clara Whitfield, word of your courage and your work ethic has traveled far. My people need a woman of heart and spirit. I offer marriage, protection, and a home among the Apache. Consider this an opportunity to join a future greater than the one forced upon you by fate." "That's a Black Hawk, chief of the Red Sky Apache." Clara blinked. Her chair scraped loudly as she sat down again. A post-order bride proposal. From an Apache king. She read it twice. 3 times. The words felt like stories from a dime novel newspaper. A warrior chief wanting her? She looked around her tiny cabin-patched walls, a floor worn smooth, the only curtain a quilt she had sewn from scraps. Why would any king want a woman with nothing left to offer? Then, near the bottom, she noticed a stamped promise from the local territorial office. "This union may strengthen peace between settlers and Apache tribes." So that was it. She wasn't chosen for beauty or charm. She was chosen to be useful, a bridge. A symbol. Clara pushed back from the table and stood, pacing. Every childhood tale she had heard about Apaches flashed in her mind: fearsome warriors, silent riders appearing from nowhere, foreign customs, a different language. Women who married into tribes were never seen again. Some stories said worse, but then she remembered the bank notice. If she stayed, her home would be taken. She would end up in a crowded boarding house, scrubbing floors for pennies, or worse, dependent on a man who saw her as a burden, not an equal. Her parents had raised her to survive. They taught her not just how to shoot a rifle or mend a saddle, but how to recognize when a road had come to its end. And she was standing at that dead end now. She folded the letter neatly, set it beside her mother's framed photograph, and whispered, "Mama, what should I do?" A wind gust rushed through a crack in the door, brushing the letter closer to her. Almost like a nudge, Clara swallowed hard. Marrying a stranger would be frightening enough. Marrying an Apache king, someone powerful enough to protect her, and dangerous enough to control her fate, that was something else entirely. But it was a chance for survival, a chance for a future, maybe even a chance at being wanted, not pitied. By sundown, she had packed her mother's locket, a single Sunday dress, and her Bible keepsakes that reminded her who she was. She saddled Pearl, tied her bedroll behind the saddle horn, and took one last look at the cabin that held every memory she had left. "I'll make you proud," she whispered to the quiet dusk. Then she mounted her horse and rode toward the unknown, toward a man called Atsa Black Hawk, who would either become her greatest sorrow or the beginning of a story she never dared to dream. The desert night greeted Clara with a chill that sank deeper than fear. Torchlight flickered against towering rock walls as she arrived at the Apache village Red Sky Territory, they called it. The air vibrated with the steady heartbeat of drums. Warriors in paint and feathers watched her from the shadows, unreadable and silent. She gripped Pearl's reins tighter, but her mare nudged her forward as if to say, "You chose this." "Go on." Atsa Black Hawk stood at the center of the gathering. He was taller than any man she had seen, his black hair braided with hawk feathers, his eyes sharp as if they saw every thought she dared hide. A buffalo hide cloak draped across his shoulders, marking rank and battle scars beneath dot when their eyes met. Clara's breath caught. He stepped forward, stopping close enough that she felt the heat radiating from him and the scent of sage on his skin. "You came," he said, his voice low like distant thunder. "I gave my word," she managed to whisper. Though her voice trembled, he reached out, not grabbing or claiming, but offering his hand. "Palm up. To join paths, both must walk," he said. "You are free to choose." The words struck her harder than any demand. She glanced at the long road behind her and placed her hand into his. His fingers wrapped around hers, large and warm, a silent promise of strength. A cheer rose from the crowd. The elders began the ceremony. They painted a white line across Atsa's chest and a red one across Clara's, symbolizing fire and peace uniting. She repeated ancient vows, guided by a kindly older woman who spoke in soft English. "Together you stand through winter and storm. His life is your life. Your heart is his heart. Two now, but one forever." Clara swallowed hard. Marriage in her old world meant papers and signatures. Here, it felt sacred. Binding not just bodies, but souls, Atsa placed a necklace of carved bone and turquoise around her neck. It was heavy like the responsibility she was taking on. "Clara Whitfield," he proclaimed. "From this night you are Clara Black Hawk, wife of the chief." The drums thundered louder. Dancers spun around them in celebration. Women brought gifts, woven blankets, moccasins, food from the harvest. Some smiled warmly. Others looked uncertain. A white woman at the side of their king. It would take time to accept. A young girl tugged at Clara's skirt, handing her a basket of bright desert flowers. "Welcome, sister," she said shyly. The gesture warmed Clara's chest, but not everyone celebrated her arrival. A warrior with a scar cutting through his eyebrow stepped close enough to growl into the fire-lit air. "A chief needs a warrior's bride, not a pale, frightened doe." Atsa's voice snapped like a whip. "Red Bear, enough." Red Bear glared, but stepped back, his resentment clear. Clara's stomach knotted. Was this what her life would be? Choosing her husband was one thing. Winning his people, that was a battle of its own. When the feast ended, the moon hung high, a brilliant white disk in a sea of stars. Atsa guided Clara to a separate lodge constructed of soft hides and cedar wood. A small fire glowed inside, casting shadows like dancing spirits. Her heart thudded painfully. The marriage was real. The night was here. Atsa removed his cloak, muscles shifting beneath his chest paint. Clara's cheeks burned. She turned away, suddenly breathless. She braced herself for roughness stories she had heard whispered back home. But instead, Atsa knelt by the fire and spoke gently. "You fear me." Clara hesitated. "Everything here is so new. Don't know how to be your wife." He looked at her with surprising softness. "You are not a prisoner here. I did not choose you to break you. He tapped his chest lightly. My people need peace. You can help us build that. But only if you choose to truly stand with me. Clara's shoulders loosened a fraction. And tonight? Atsa stood and slowly approached, each step controlled and respectful. He touched her cheek with the back of his knuckles, barely grazing her skin. Tonight we sleep, he said simply. Trust must be grown, not taken. Her eyes widened. Relief washed over her, followed by something else. Gratitude? Admiration? The beginning of desire? He lay down on one side of the furs. Clara cautiously lay on the other, her back to him but aware of every breath he took. For the first time since she'd stepped onto Apache land, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she might have found something solid enough to stand on, under the desert moon. With a king beside her and the future stretching wide as the horizon, Clara closed her eyes and whispered a single prayer. Let this choice lead to something good. The dawn was pale over red sky territory, brushing the desert in soft golds and pinks. Clara awoke wrapped in furs, the warmth of the lodge a strange comfort. Across the room, Atsa Black Hawk lay awake, eyes following her every move not with judgment, but with a watchful patience that both unnerved and intrigued her. She rose quietly, careful not to wake him, and slipped outside to let the cool air of the plains sharpen her thoughts. Clara quickly realized that living among the Apache was nothing like her old life. Every day demanded attention and skill harnessing horses that could sense fear, learning to track small game over miles of desert, and understanding the intricate social rules that governed the tribe. She fumbled at first, tripping over braids of hay or forgetting the proper greeting to a tribal elder. Some women watched her awkwardly, whispering in the Apache language. Others smiled with encouraging patience. Each day, Clara felt her pride stretch thin, but she also felt herself learning, growing stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined. Yet there were challenges that went beyond skill or knowledge. Red Bear, a tall warrior with a permanent scowl and a scar slicing his brow, did not approve of her presence. He would glare at Clara when she passed, whispering warnings to others. A white bride cannot lead us, he muttered once, so Clara heard it and froze, cheeks burning. Even Atsa, though protective, could not remove the tension she felt from Red Bear's disapproval. The tribe's whispers reminded her constantly that she was different, that her heart and body were symbols of union she did not yet understand fully. Clara felt torn between two worlds. She remembered her old town, the dusty streets, the judgmental neighbors, and the harsh winters she had survived alone. But there was something in the Apache lands that stirred a new spirit within her. The sunsets here were vast and violent, the nights alive with calls of coyotes and the crackle of fire. And Atsa, his presence, was a mystery she wanted to understand. She had begun noticing small gestures, how he adjusted his stance to shield her from the wind, how his eyes softened when she made progress with the children, and how he silently encouraged her in the small victories that came each day. One afternoon, as Clara guided the children of the village in English lessons, a skill she had learned from her mother's careful tutoring, Red Bear confronted her. "You do not belong here," he said, voice low but sharp. His anger was palpable, like a hawk circling above its prey. "You are a symbol of their world, not ours." Clara's heart raced. She felt fear, anger, and something else, something like resolve. "I am here," she said, steadying her voice despite trembling hands. "And I am learning your ways. I want to belong." Red Bear laughed bitterly and turned away, muttering threats under his breath, but Atsa stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the warrior's shoulder. "Her worth is not measured by her skin," he said, voice like rolling thunder. "A heart's worth is what guides it, not its color." Clara's chest lifted at his words. She had never felt such protection, not just for her body, but for her dignity and purpose. Slowly, she began to realize that Atsa's strength was not only in battle, it was in the way he led, guided, and defended those he cared for, including her. Days turned into weeks. Clara taught, learned, stumbled, and rose again. She rode across the plains with warriors, hunted with men who had once seemed terrifying, and learned the language of wind and trail. Gradually, she felt herself belonging not completely, but enough to begin trusting that she could survive,
thrive, and even find joy here. And through it all,
Atsa remained a constant presence, not imposing, but patient. Sometimes he would watch her from a distance as she worked with the children, and Clara would catch the faintest hint of pride in his gaze. Her heart, which had once pounded with fear, now beat with something new, a cautious, burgeoning desire. The desert taught her patience. The tribe taught her respect, and Atsa, without trying, taught her courage. The hardest lesson, she realized, was to trust that she could bridge these two worlds, her past as Clara Whitfield and her present as Clara Black Hawk. One night, as the fire flickered and Atsa slept near her in the lodge, she whispered softly into the dark, "I will learn. I will belong. I will honor this choice." And for the first time since leaving home, she believed it might be possible. The horizon was burning with the first light of dawn when Clara spotted the dust clouds. At first, she thought it was a herd of buffalo, but the steady, unnatural plumes of dirt told her a different story. Horsemen, dozens of them, were riding fast, armed and shouting. Settlers, soldiers, some she recognized from her old town. Her stomach twisted. Their arrival was not a friendly visit. The whispers she had heard from Red Bear suddenly became sharper, more urgent. "They will not understand," he said, his voice low, his eyes flashing with anger. "They think you were taken against your will." Clara's heart pounded. She knew the rumors that would fly if the settlers reached the Apache village, that she had been kidnapped, forced into marriage, that Atsa was a dangerous savage. She also knew the consequences: war, bloodshed, and ruin for the tribe. And she understood that even Atsa's strength could not stop a misunderstanding of this scale. She stepped into the open, lifting her hands to signal peace. Atsa appeared beside her, the calm in the storm. The two of them were an unusual sight, a young white bride standing tall beside the Apache king, both facing a charge of mounted soldiers. The leader of the settlers, a young man she recognized as Thomas Greaves, who had often sneered at her in her hometown, spurred his horse forward. "Clara Whitfield," he called, "you have been kidnapped. Surrender to us." Clara's pulse raced. She could see the anger in the soldier's eyes, the weapons at the ready. Yet she refused to flee. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice ringing clear across the plain. "I am here of my own free will. I chose this marriage. You will not take me from him or his people." Murmurs spread through the soldiers. Some looked confused. Others exchanged wary glances. The audacity of a young woman stepping forward alone, standing between their swords and the Apache warriors, stunned them. Red Bear, however, used the confusion to his advantage. Whispering lies to a few warriors, he tried to incite violence, claiming the settlers intended to attack. Tension crackled through the village like static. Clara sensed it and acted instinctively. "Stop!" she shouted. "There is no need for blood. Let us speak." Asta stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Do not fear," he murmured. "Your courage is our shield." Clara dismounted and approached the settlers. Thomas Greaves' jaw tightened when he saw her. "This is madness," he muttered. "She belongs in the settlement." "No," Clara said firmly. "I belong here. Atsa is my husband. I chose him, and I am not a prisoner. Listen to me, not your assumptions. Peace can exist between our people if we respect each other." Her words, so steady despite the fear, began to sink in. A few soldiers lowered their rifles, whispering among themselves. Atsa, still beside her, added a calm authority that none could ignore. No harm will come from our tribe. We honor our word and we honor life. Red Bear's fury burned, but his scheme to incite a battle failed under the weight of Clara's bravery and Atsa's leadership. The settlers were forced to reconsider. Some rode closer cautiously, listening to Clara explain how misunderstandings could spark unnecessary war. By mid-morning, a fragile truce was formed. The settlers agreed to observe the village without aggression, and Clara returned to the tribe with her head held high. She had faced fear, danger, and prejudice and had negotiated a solution that preserved peace. Atsa's eyes softened as he approached her. "You risked your life," he said quietly. "You stood between worlds and held them together. You honor your name and mine." Clara's cheeks warmed at his praise. The fear that had haunted her since she left home began to give way to something else, a growing certainty that she belonged here, that her choice to come had not been foolish, and that her heart had found a place of strength and courage. That night, as the stars stretched across the vast desert sky, Clara and Atsa stood together outside the lodge. A gentle wind brushed her hair against her cheek. "I didn't know I could be brave like this," she admitted softly. "You were always brave," Atsa said. "You just needed to trust yourself." "And me." Clara felt a surge of warmth as she leaned slightly toward him. Trust, courage, and love, each mingling in her heart like a desert fire, quiet but unstoppable. For the first time, she understood that being a bridge between worlds could also mean finding a place where she truly belonged. The night air held promise. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, but Clara no longer faced them with fear alone. She had begun to stand firmly, not just beside the Apache king, but with him. The first light of dawn burned across the horizon like a promise of trouble. Clara awoke to the scent of smoke and the distant clatter of hooves. Red Bear's treachery had grown bolder overnight. He had orchestrated an attack on a nearby settler caravan and blamed it on the Apache, hoping to spark war and discredit Atsa's leadership. Clara's stomach tightened. She had feared this moment, the delicate balance between two worlds collapsing in a single heartbeat. She could see the smoke curling above the village and hear the cries of settlers in panic. Atsa, calm as ever in appearance but tense beneath his skin, called the warriors together. "We must protect our people without striking in anger," he said. "Red Bear seeks chaos. Do not give him the power." Clara's mind raced. She couldn't just wait. If Red Bear succeeded, lives would be lost, including her own husband's. Without thinking, she grabbed a soldier's horse from the stable, a quick brown mare that snorted in protest. Swinging onto her back, she spurred the animal forward, racing across the plains toward the settlers' position to warn them. The wind tore at her hair, stung her cheeks, but fear gave her wings. She reached the edge of the small clearing just as settlers raised their weapons. Clara shouted and waved her arms. "Stop! This is a trap. Red Bear wants you to fight. Atsa Black Hawk does not wish for war." The soldiers hesitated. Recognition flickered in their eyes. Clara's courage, the audacity of a young woman standing alone between two forces, began to calm their anger. Thomas Greaves, the man who had once sneered at her back home, lowered his rifle slowly, disbelief etched across his face. "She's telling the truth," he muttered. Meanwhile, back at the village, Red Bear's plan began to unravel. Atsa, leading the warriors with measured precision, moved to intercept him. Clara could see the confrontation from a distance, the flash of anger in Red Bear's eyes, the calm, unyielding stance of the Apache king. The two men collided in a blur of motion. Atsa fought to protect his people, but in the chaos, Red Bear slashed across his side. The wound was deep. Atza staggered but did not fall. Clara's heart froze. She could not let him die, not like this, not here. Spurring Pearl again, she raced back toward the village, weaving through the smoke and the confusion. She reached Atza's side as Red Bear was finally overpowered by the combined warriors and settlers, a captured threat. Clara knelt beside Atza, her hands trembling as she pressed a clean cloth to his wound. "You risked everything," he murmured, blood warm against her palms. "Why? I couldn't just stand there," she said, voice breaking. Clara." His dark eyes met hers, fierce yet tender. "You are braver than any warrior I know." The fire from Red Bear's attack had begun to spread toward the edge of the village, and together Clara and a few warriors worked to put it out. She lifted buckets of water, pulled burning debris aside, and felt her muscles scream. But the adrenaline and terror sharpened her focus. She was no longer just a bride in a foreign land. She was part of this tribe, part of this fight. By midday, the fires were extinguished, the settlers convinced that the Apache's leadership sought peace, and Red Bear exiled from the village. Atza's wound was serious but not fatal, and the relief that washed over Clara was immense. That evening, as the sun sank behind the desert horizon, Clara sat beside Atza in the lodge. He was bandaged, but his hand found hers instinctively, holding it with the quiet intimacy they had begun to share. "You saved the village," he said softly. "You saved me." Clara blushed, looking down. "We saved each other," she murmured. Atza's eyes softened, the firelight dancing across his strong features. "You are no longer just my bride," he said, voice low. "You are my equal, my partner, and soon, my heart belongs to you as well." Clara's pulse quickened. Fear, respect, admiration, and desire mingled in her chest. She leaned closer, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. The danger had passed, but the bond they had forged in fire and blood was now unbreakable. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and smoke, but inside, warmth and trust filled the lodge. Clara realized with a thrill she had never known in her life on the frontier that this world, the Apache world, her new life, was no longer foreign. She had fought for it, risked her life for it, and discovered something deeper, a love that could survive fear, fire, and betrayal. And as she held Atza's hand, she knew that the coming days, though still uncertain, would be faced together. She was no longer alone. She was home. The desert dawn broke in soft gold, spilling over the plains and lighting the red sky territory with a gentle brilliance. After the chaos of Red Bear's betrayal and the near disaster with the settlers, the village now carried a cautious but tangible sense of relief. Clara Whitfield, no longer just the post-order bride, had become a bridge between two worlds. And for the first time, she could feel the full weight and wonder of what she had accomplished. The surviving settlers, who had once seen the Apache as dangerous outsiders, were beginning to understand that peace was possible. Their eyes no longer held fear when they met the steady gaze of Atza Black Hawk. They saw a man of honor, a leader who protected his people with wisdom as much as strength. And they had seen Clara standing tall, negotiating with courage and intelligence, ensuring the violence Red Bear hoped to incite never came to pass. As Clara walked through the village, children ran to greet her, their laughter bouncing across the open space. They called her White Dove Woman, a title both tender and symbolic. She smiled, feeling warmth swell in her chest. Each small smile, each handshake, each word of gratitude reminded her that she had found her place here, not by blood, not by birthright, but by courage and heart. Atza appeared beside her, the familiar steady presence she had come to trust. His eyes, dark and deep, softened as he studied her. "The settlers accept our peace," he said quietly. Because of you. Clara blushed. Because we stood together, she corrected. I could not have done this without you. Without your guidance. He smiled faintly, a rare expression that made her heart flutter. You are not just my wife, he said. You are my equal. And in my eyes, more than that. The words made Clara's pulse quicken. She had feared entering this world, feared the unknown, feared losing herself. But now, with Atza beside her, the fear had faded, replaced with admiration. Love and the deep, unspoken bond that had grown stronger with every challenge. The elders called a gathering to formalize a peace treaty with the settlers, a simple ceremony under the sprawling desert sky. Boundaries were agreed upon, trade opened, and mutual respect declared. Clara stood by Atza's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She had played a crucial role in these negotiations, and the settlers nodded with newfound respect. After the ceremony, the tribe celebrated with music, dance, and feasts that stretched late into the night. Clara moved among the women, learning their songs, sharing laughter, and feeling a sense of belonging she had never known. She looked across the fire at Atza, who watched her with quiet pride, his presence a steady anchor amidst the celebration. As the night deepened, the festivities wound down. Clara and Atza walked together to the edge of the village, where the desert stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars. The wind whispered across the sands, carrying the scent of sage and the memory of fires recently fought and quelled. Atza stopped and turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Clara Whitfield, he said, his voice low and reverent, when I first saw you, I wondered if a woman from another world could ever understand mine. Now I know. You not only understand, you strengthen it. You strengthen me. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears of joy. And I thought I would never belong anywhere, she whispered. But here, with you, I feel whole. He pulled her close, and for the first time, they kissed under the desert stars, a slow, tender kiss filled with relief, passion, and the promise of a shared life. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with certainty. The bond they had forged through trials, courage, and trust had blossomed into love. When they finally pulled apart, Clara rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his arms. I used to think bravery was fighting or surviving alone, she murmured. Now I know. Bravery is standing together, even when the world is against you. Atza pressed his lips to her temple. And together, we can face anything. In that moment, the desert felt endless but safe, wild but welcoming. Clara had left the life she knew, entered the unknown, faced danger, fear, and prejudice, and emerged stronger, loved, and respected. The West was vast, full of stories, and she had found her own, written with courage, trust, and a love that would bridge worlds. As the firelight flickered across their faces, the stars above and the desert stretching beyond, Clara whispered to herself with a smile, "This is home, and this is love."